Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me now? So sorry about this technical difficulty. Um, and thank you for your patience and letting me know. So I think I'm back. If you can let me know that you can actually hear me. Okay, I got a thumbs up. So thank you for your patience once again, and thank you for coming this evening. We are going to be talking about common mistakes for premolar crown preparations. My name is Dr. Alyssa Marshall, and just in case this is your first time with me, let me just share a little bit about myself with you in case you're wondering, who are you? Okay, like you, I'm an internationally trained dentist, and like perhaps many of you, I did not make it in the first year that I tried to get into an advanced standing program. I did get 2 interview calls, one with and one without a bench test, but didn't make it into either one of those. Second year, I decided if I didn't make it in this year, I was going to go back to my home country, and I meant it. I was willing to give it one more go, but beyond that, I thought it was a waste of time and money. Like, what am I doing here? That kind of thing. So I rethought, reworked everything, starting from my applications all the way to my bench test and interview. And this time I got 14 interview calls. I went to 10 of them, 9 of which had bench tests. And then I did stop going to interviews after I had an acceptance from a school, which I preferred over a school that I got a call from. And from the 10 schools that I went to, 9 schools accepted me right off the bat. And, all I wanted really was one acceptance. I didn't really care where it was from. And, I ended up with a luxury of choices, lots and lots of choices. And then since then, I started helping friends. And as they got in, the word got out to friends of friends. And they reached out to me as they saw their friend get in. And slowly just word got out that there's this person named Alyssa that can help people get into dental school. And that's really how International Dental Central started in 2013. Kevin and I joined forces and we started it up officially. And since then, since 2013, we've been working with dentists from all around the world, people a lot like you, helping them get into an advanced standing program. Okay, enough about me. Who here today has an interview call coming up, and for whom is like this upper premolar crown preparation an important prep to practice? I'd love to kind of just get a feel for who's here. And at any point during when I'm chatting, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat box. I will get to them at the end of the presentation. We will be focusing on questions related to the topic at hand. And I'll get to as many questions as possible as time permits. Loma Linda, LLU, Buffalo, Michigan. We got the whole suite here. Congratulations, you guys, by the way. That is very, very exciting that you have a call. The first year, one of the big mistakes that I made actually was the fact that when I got the call from the school that had the interview call, it was very late in the game. And I waited really long. I was just like, I don't know. I don't think I have the time to do this. I just kind of like I wasted a lot of time. And I was not prepared by the time the bench test rolled around. And I didn't treat that opportunity seriously enough. That actually goes the same for both schools that I went to the first time. And I really don't want you to make that same mistake. At the end of the day, you really only need just one school to say yes to you. And this fall, you're going to be done. And so whatever opportunity it is that you have on hand, some people are fortunate enough to have more than one. Some people have that one. Whatever your situation is, once you have that opportunity in your hand, you have to really treat it like a precious little thing and put all of your efforts into doing your best to perform on that day. Because remember, as qualified as you are, every single person sitting in that interview room is also a dentist. You know, everybody is honestly qualified to get a spot, and that is what makes this process very unusual and very difficult. Is the fact, you know, it's the fact that like, oh, you have to be a licensed dentist just to be qualified to even apply. And so everybody's very smart, everybody's very qualified, and yet competition is extremely fierce because of there are more people wanting spots than spots available. It really is, you know, supply and demand. And so once you have that opportunity, treat it like gold, and yeah, treat it like gold, and just do whatever it takes and put everything you've got into it. Even if it doesn't work out, quite frankly, that effort that you've put in, it's still yours. Like, you're not gonna, even if it is, let's say, next year that you have to prepare for it again, you don't start from scratch again. That I can really, really tell you. You don't start from scratch. You start from where you left off. And that is, if you, depending on how seriously prepared for it, it will set you much, much farther away, like ahead of other people, and it will do you much, much good. Okay, so we have a workshop to get to, so let me start that up. Give me 1 second. If you know me, I'm a little tech nervous. So give me a second while I start this up. Okay. Okay, I think I'm sharing my presentation with you now. I think I'm sharing my presentation with you now. I believe I'm doing it. And so while this is up, I'm not a very good multitasker, so I will not be able to see your chat comments as they go through, but do ask questions. I will scroll back to the top of your chat history to answer any of them after this whole presentation is over. You're going to see some photos, or many, many photos. This whole presentation is based on photos of real work from Bench Test Mastery members, photos that were sent in for feedbacks, basically. And in case you're wondering what I mean by this, we have a bench test training program called the Bench Test Mastery. It's an online program, and feedbacks is a very crucial part of the program. It's where I get to evaluate the work of the members and then send the members personalized feedbacks that are video feedbacks for where they are and how to improve from there on. So the photos you'll see today are photos that members have submitted recently, actually in the past few months. Growing an eye for recognizing ideal preps is very important, obviously, but recognizing it enough alone, it's not enough. So on top of knowing what's not ideal and knowing what is ideal, we also need to know what to focus on and how to improve from where it is that you are. If you've been practicing for a while, you may notice that your preps look similar to one another. Like you make similar mistakes over and over again, and that's where like knowing where to focus on and what to do comes in very handy. As we look through each photo, we're going to look through and discuss the main point that I'm wanting to make. And If there are other glaring mistakes, we'll touch up on those as well. And if you are a member, you may see your work here today. Okay. Before going in, though, I do want to say this. Critique systematically. When you're practicing, I don't care if you are a member of Working With Me. I don't care if you are somebody that went to some live training course. I don't care if you're working at home by yourself or some other mentor. Whatever your situation is, you need to learn how to critique your own work systematically, because on the day of the bench test, nobody is there with you. You are by yourself, right? It's a very obvious thing, but if you start relying completely on other people, then you can't do it. So when I say critique systematically, this is what I'm talking about. When you do a crown prep, there's so much going on. There's many, many steps for you to take, and lots of things have to happen. And you have to keep like 1,000 things in your mind when you're working. And after, when you work, like when you're evaluating your work as you progress and afterwards, like you have so many different checkpoints. So go view by view. Imagine you're looking at it more like a 2D photograph of your work. So occlusal view, buccal view, proximal view, something like that. Go view by view by view, and looking at each view, evaluate the criteria that you have access to from that view. That way you're looking at everything, and we're really not like leaving. We're not weighing of certain things more heavily than others. And by this, I mean this. When applicants practice, there are a few things that people really want to focus on more than others, but often they are not the most crucial things. When members join, I often have to kind of shift focus from what they're focusing on to what is a little bit more important and urgent to focus on. And the things that often applicants like to focus heavily on are things like occlusal anatomy. Let's just use that as an example. Occlusal anatomy. Like, did my occlusal preparation reflect and maintain the original anatomy? That is one thing that a lot of people are like, okay, I have to make sure that this is done well. And yeah, it is true. Like, you do have to make sure that it is done well, but oftentimes because they're so focused on that, they kind of lose track of the other points to focus on. And in terms of like looking at the occlusal surface, they only look at that, and they lose track of other things like the occlusal clearance, for instance, which if you don't have enough occlusal clearance, quite frankly, a good occlusal anatomy is not going to do you any good because there's no room for the crown material itself. So things like this. So critiquing systematically with going view by view by view, ticking things kind of off your list is great because it won't let those kinds of things slip. Yeah, so of course, like if you have like the actual tooth in front of you, you will be like, say, turning it to make sure that like what you're suspecting is true or not true, etc. But stick to the systematic approach when you are doing your evaluation, your self-evaluation. And that is how I've prepared the presentation as well. So, occlusal view. When you look at a premolar crown preparation from occlusal view, okay, let's look at some examples here. We see two photos. The point I wanted to make here is the margin width, okay? Even the crown on the left, the operator had noted that this crown was a PFM. The operator did not say that this crown is a focal crown. The operator mentioned that this was a PFM. For a PFM, a shoulder needs to be between 1 and 1.2 millimeters. This is a very extreme example of a very thin margin that is buccally. And I would have totally guessed that it was meant to be a focal crown if I just looked at the photo without the operator's notes. So this is a very, easy to identify, like, oh, that for a shoulder, that's way too thin. This is where a lot of people leave their shoulder widths. This is a shoulder that is obviously much wider and much more appropriate than this one, but it is not quite wide enough. The operator just stopped just short of a millimeter. The criteria for the shoulder width is, it does depend on the school, but for most of the schools, and by most I really mean like the majority of the schools, it's between 1 and 1.2 millimeters. Between, it's not almost 1 millimeter. Almost 1 millimeter is where a lot of people leave it at. Okay, don't do that. Some other things just to note while we are at these two views. This is a depth groove mark that has been left behind, meaning depth grooves were not completely connected all the way, meaning probably if the depth grooves are given correctly, there is some interocclusal space issues going on with this preparation. And when you are connecting depth grooves as you're working, make sure you're not leaving these kinds of marks behind, and connect them through and through all the way. If you do that, you're gonna not have these marks behind, because if you think about where you're giving this depth groove right here, you're giving it on the highest point, right? Anything on either side is lower than this point. You're basically marking that highest point with a depth groove saying, this is my new highest point. But if you leave the mark behind, this is higher than here right now, and that is not okay. It's supposed to be lower. Yeah, so like you can, even though we cannot feel it with an Explorer, we can almost feel it. We can tell that it's going to feel like from here, as I move my Explorer from here to here, it's going to go up, but it shouldn't. It should just go down, right? So I just wanted to point that out. This preparation has a very, very wide functional cusp bevel, wider than it should be. And the mesial and distal show very different styles of chamfer to shoulder, shoulder to chamfer, chamfer to shoulder transitions. On the mesial side, it really is transitioning only right here. The margin width is pretty much the same all the way up until here. And here is where it is thinning out and becoming this thin chamfer. On the distal margin, it is thinning out here. And distal is much more well done than the mesial. It should thin out interproximally, not as it is approaching, not here, not here. It's here that it should thin out. Here, the internal line angles of the preparation need to follow the cable surface margin in a similar oval-ish shape. So when this is round and it's going around like this, we want this internal line angle to completely be round also, and we want basically these two curves to be totally parallel to one another. That's the only way we ensure that we have a even width shoulder all the way across. The only area that does not apply is interproximally where your margin transitions, and we know exactly where that should happen. It should happen here to here. And during that time, the internal line angle should steadily approach the cable surface margin. Here is another area where it should have a very even width margin. On the lingual or the palatal side, it is much better done, but here on the buccal side, you see it very angular, right? We have 1, 2, 3. And on the right-hand side, we have a mistake that's completely the opposite. We have it very pointed. Both are incorrect. We need to follow this, the exact shape, just like that. And also don't forget that whichever tooth you're working on, teeth are always round. They're not circle. it's kind of like a squished circle, right? Like whatever tooth we're talking about, it's like a squished up circle, and to what degree and to which direction it's squished from is going to be different from with depending on like what tooth we're talking about, along with the size, but it is always round and convex everywhere, just like a circle would be. So keep that in mind, and when you see your preparation have angular areas, sit back and think like, oh, is a tooth angular? No, it's not. Okay, why is mine angular? Oh, I did not do a very good job following this outside shape. Here, what I wanted to show you is the fact that the contacts are closed both mesially and distally with the adjacent tooth. Now, there are other mistakes here, and we'll talk about that as well, but it was such a good representation of closed contacts in crowns. When you do a crown preparation, you have to lower your margin enough so that we see a pink stripe of gingiva on both sides. If you don't have that, it is impossible to capture a good impression, an accurate impression of that area. Under whatever is underneath the contacts, we cannot capture, which means that the lab cannot create for us a good emergence profile for that area. They have no idea what anything cervical to this contact area looks like, but it's important for them, right? Because they have to continue that curve up occlusally, and so that when we seat the crown will restore the original anatomy, or as close as it can, that the tooth had beforehand. So look for that, and if you see when you're working that you do not see pink stripes, that your contacts are closed. And you see here, there's some pink, there's some pink. We ideally want to see it more like this, but depending on the type ront, we see it here, we see it here, we see it here, but it's missing here. So keep that in mind as one of the checkpoints. Another thing that, while we're just at this view, a few more critiques is, first, this is also very angular of a preparation, right? It's like straight, straight, slightly round, and almost straight like that. But the tooth doesn't have that. So we want everything to be curvy. Another thing is your margin width on the buccal as well. It is not enough of a width. And another thing is the lack of a functional cusp bevel, which we need right here. It's the upper tooth. We need a palatal functional cusp bevel, missing right now. So those are some things to look for when you are working or self-critiquing from the occlusal view. Not included here because it doesn't actually show up that often for premolars, but it does show up more for molars, is actually a shift in central groove location. Central groove roughly sits in the center of the tooth, obviously, but sometimes when we do the prep and like lower the entire occlusal surface, it's very easy to make it shift to either the buccal or the lingual side, making one cusp much larger than the other, and that other cusp much smaller. For premolars, that doesn't come up all that often, but it is another something to just keep in mind. Buccal and lingual view. Here is a buccal view of a premolar crown prep. The prep is over tapered, right? You can see excessive taper, and it's hard to find, especially in the distal, where the distinction between the axial wall and the occlusal surface is starting. It's kind of like just rounding out, and the blending and bleeding into the occlusal surface. And on natural teeth, like, we have a very clean cut mark, and we want our preps to have that clean cut mark as well. So our preps, because they have to go convergence, they have to go in, but then they're going to have a clean, like, start of where the occlusal surface is, like that and like that. But this doesn't have that. And this prep, and this is a very common look that I get, and I always think when I look at that it looks a lot like candy corn. So kind of just have this in your mind. This really only happens for premolars. If it looks like candy corn, then you are probably have both mistakes going on. You're over tapered, and you do not have a clear distinction between your axial and your occlusal. It just kind of blends in and meets at the tip, like that. For this tooth, we also see that the margins are pretty rough. The shoulder needs to be a lot smoother than that. This is pretty similar and comparable to the example we just looked at, but it has a few different characteristics. And this is another very common look that I get. There is a clear distinction in this case between the axial and the occlusal. It's like here and here. But just like the one before, these are over tapered. And do you notice how short these walls are? It shouldn't have become this short, and they're short because the mesial and the distal slopes of the buccal cusp are very steep. Look at here. It should be like this, right? Like parallel to this approximately. This slope at this angle is a lot steeper than what we have down here. The correct slope for this tooth to take on is like this. And if it did have that, see how much longer this distal wall would have become? And that directly impacts retention. So it is a very important feature. And so this is the buccal view. This is the same tooth again. So you can see the steepness and the short walls. Here we have a different style going on. The planes are extremely distinct, right? But this is so very sharp, right? We always have to run our finger on top of a finished preparation and feel for any sharpness. And usually, this preparation is very unusually sharp. Even when I see sharpness under preparations, it's usually not quite this sharp. But this one is, and you see that this is super sharp, and it almost looks like a spine. Yeah, this is the same tooth. Like, it has like a spine going down. Make sure that in an effort to, this operator probably did this in an effort to really define the anatomy, right? But there is a right amount for everything, and we cannot get carried away and get too focused on one thing while neglecting the others. Everything is kind of like a balancing act. And so in this case, the operator focused a little bit too much on making the anatomy super distinct and forgot about the other things. So this spine is way too weak to be left like this under a crown. So it has to be smoothened out. And it is even much sharper than a natural tooth would have it anyway. So the anatomy became a little bit too exaggerated, right? Also, if you notice, especially the mesial slope of the buccal cusp is too steep. Look here, and also look at the adjacent tooth. It should be at an angle like this, right? And on the lingual cusp, the lingual cusp, both buccal and lingual slopes are steep. Also, just one more thing. The margin is not following the gingiva very well on the buccal side. So the gingiva has a up and down to it, but this margin is pretty much cutting straight across, right? We want a uniformly approximately 0.5 millimeter supragingival margin. And so that means that if the gingiva slopes, we slope. And no, it's not very easy to do, but it needs to be done. So we work in small chunks, making sure that wherever we're working on is parallel to the gingiva, or that's what how you should be approaching it. Okay, this is another buccal view, and it has a few mistakes, but let's first talk about the taper. The mesial and the distal walls are extremely parallel to one another. There is pretty much no taper in this preparation, right? It is very, very important that a crown has taper. It is a cardinal part of a crown, otherwise, first, the lab can't make it. The lab can't fabricate the crown. Second of all, if the lab magically does fabricate the crown, good luck seating it and even trying it on. Yeah, so make sure it has visible taper. Okay, this has insufficient taper. Also, in this tooth, it has the opposite mistake of what we saw before. The couple few examples we saw before, in that it's a little too flat, right? We want it just a little bit like that. But this, if this operator had caught it during the test, they would have been able to fix it because nothing is over reduced yet, right? We just have to go back and bring it up. Whereas some of the other mistakes we looked at, this one, for instance, like the operator can still round it out and the operator can still drop the margin, but this, we can't get this height back. So we can fix it by going that way, but then we are creating too large of an interocclusal space as well. So there are parts that have been over-reduced in this prep, right? Like here and here. Whereas this prep, it hasn't been. So if this operator had that critical eye to notice their mistakes, she or he would have been able to address it and fix it before submitting that preparation. Another couple of things that stand out from this view is the fact that also, just like the example we saw before, the margin is not following the gingiva very well, right? It is sloping a little bit, but then it cuts straight across here when the gingiva itself is keep on going up. So yeah, it needs to go like that. And the distal margin height is high. This is more than 0.5 millimeter difference in the height, so that has to be lowered. Here we have excessive taper. This is too much taper. We want less than this. This is a classic candy corn experience appearance, right? So it pretty much exactly looks like that. There isn't a clear distinction between where the axial wall starts and where the occlusal starts, and it's kind of a blur and it's a blending in. Also, if you notice, the margins are equigingival instead of being subgingival. I'm sorry, I said subgingival, didn't I? What I meant was, instead of being supragingival, which is what we need, 0.5 millimeter supragingival. This, I was thinking about this slide, that's why I said subgingival margins. This is a preparation that shows subgingival margins. We have to make sure our margins are above the gingiva. It needs to be all the way out here. Another thing that stands out in this preparation is insufficient occlusal clearance. We need a couple of millimeters interocclusally to give room for the crown material. And in this case, we don't have it. And if you're wondering, just look at the two adjacent teeth. Look at the cusp tips. And then look at this cusp tip. Oh, maybe a millimeter was reduced at the most, right? Premolars are small teeth to start with. And when you make the axials taper and get rid of approximately 2 millimeters of the occlusal surface, it's going to become smaller. Like, it's going to become pretty small. Don't let that, like, oh my God, is this not too small? Like, get in your way of more critical thinking, like how much interocclusal space, how much width of the shoulder. If you are sticking to those criteria, you are on the right track, okay? But if you stop your prep short because you think that your tooth is becoming too small, but you're not exactly sure how to evaluate and be sure that it is becoming small, you're likely making a mistake. Here, it's not a perfect photo, but we see closed contacts. And this is actually the same tooth that I showed you earlier from the occlusal down, because closed contacts, we don't just see it from the occlusal, we also see it from the buccal and the palatal, but usually the buccal is a little more convenient location for us to look at, especially when the typodon is mounted, right? So you see the tooth, the contact being completely alive here. Also note the mesial and distal walls are parallel to one another. And when we say the contacts are closed, we are also talking about the fact that the interproximally, the margins are too high. Okay, and the interproximal margins being high is another mistake that happens very often, and I think I pointed it out to you a little bit earlier in another picture. So the extreme version of high interproximal contacts, or the high interproximal margins, the extreme version of that is closed contacts. But margins can be too high without it being closed as well. Also note in this tooth, insufficient occlusal clearance. This tooth maybe has a millimeter interocclusal space. So this operator needs to give deeper depth grooves, make sure you are giving enough room for material, whether it's, you know, interocclusally or axially. We also see here, this should be a shoulder. The shoulder width looks questionable, right? And just to kind of remind you of what this looked like from the occlusal, here's that picture again. And yes, like this definitely confirms the fact that the shoulder width was not wide enough. Here are two premolar crown preparations done side by side, but they're sticking out in different directions, right? The line of draw for neither of them is correct. The line of draw should be coming like this and like this. So if you just focus, so this can be confusing. Both teeth are done inaccurately, and they kind of visually compound the effect and really make it look like they're going like away from each other. But yeah, so both teeth should have a line of draw that is, it should be more parallel to this. Like, oops, sorry. Like so. Also note how number 5 does not have enough taper, and it's also sporting a little undercut right here. So these two walls are parallel, and underneath the distal wall is an undercut. And this number 4 is a little over tapered. Yeah. So another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at the tooth from the buccal view, and when you're working on premolar crown preparations, for the most part, you should be looking at this view with direct vision. You should just be looking down and seeing this part. So make sure that it is in harmony with the teeth next to it. And line of draw is in line with that. So when you are bringing in your burr needs to be in alignment with the long axis of this tooth. And you know, you're going to lose the long axis of the tooth as you go because you already prepped it. So if you lose it, go to the distal tooth. It's pretty much the same. So just go here, take the long axis, bring it back, and then continue that way. So that was buccal and lingual view, and we have one more view left, which is a proximal view. Proximal view looks like this. This is the view that a lot of people forget to look at when they're working, but it is extremely important. It has a lot of information. Just like the buccal view shows the taper, so does a proximal view. In this case, I captured this photo because I wanted to show you the size of the functional cusp bevel being too wide. And really the best place to evaluate the functional cusp bevel is from the proximal view. Even though you can see some from the occlusal view, the best way to evaluate it is from the proximal view. So when you're self-evaluating after you do some preps, make sure you always unscrew the tooth and look at it from the side. And when it is still mounted too, you want to use your mirror to get the proximal view. But then after that's all done, you should unscrew it and look at it again, just to make sure that you didn't miss anything. On the left hand, these are two different preps, but on the left hand side, you see a very rough margin. Right? Way too rough. Can't have that. Whether it is shoulder or a chamfer, this is also rough, as you can see right here. Both are rough. We can't have that. This picture I'm showing you because of this. 1, 2, 3. The correct shape for this area is, as rough as it is this, right? Go up gradually and then down. It's not triangular, but it has like a gradual shift. So it's not a abrupt shift. This is a very abrupt shift, right? And then there are many, many shifts that are happening here. The shape is incorrect in terms of its overall, like how it should be presented. So we're going for a look more like this, just smoother. Here we see the palatal wall being over tapered. And here we see a divergent walls. Completely divergent walls, right? So these two teeth are rocking opposite mistakes in this case. This is a worse mistake to make than this, because oftentimes, like this does not get in the way of us being able to create a good crown for this patient. Let's just put it that way. Often patients will come with an existing crown. When you remove it, it will be already too over tapered, things like that. Or you remove huge restorations and it's not quite it doesn't quite need to be built up, so that it's not too tapered so that it needs to be built up, but it really would exceed the amount of taper that we want to see in an ideal prep situation, that kind of thing. But we can still make a really good crown for a patient like this, and that will last a long time. But this, we can't make a crown, right? Because the lab can't even start making the wax up. It has to be able to go in and out, right? Because they're going to wax it on top of here and then remove it from the mold and make that into the crown. But because it's divergent, that is just physically impossible. So please make sure that your prep is not divergent. The divergence, we see this a lot. It usually happens from the proximal view. It can also happen, obviously, from the buccal view as well, but it happens less because the buccal view, it's more glaringly obvious than the proximal view. Proximal view is one that people miss very, very often. Also, the functional cusp bevel is way too tiny. And for a PFM, the margin widths are very, very similar, right? Which it shouldn't be. The palatal, the chamfer needs to be a lot smaller. Now, I'm actually not sure if this was meant to be a PFM or an all ceramic crown. But anyway, if this were to be a PFM, hypothetically, then the palatal margin is way too thick. A forgotten functional cusp bevel. Forgotten. It's not here. This happens more often than you would think. It's just like a feature that people forget to give. Don't forget to give your functional cusp bevel, okay? You just, by default, if you don't give a functional cusp bevel, your interocclusal space is not enough on your functional cusp. That's why we need that bevel, to give that room. Otherwise, you just don't have enough space. Also, just take a quick look at the interproximal margin, where it should be highest here, not here. So that shape is off. And the shoulder width is not enough as well. Okay, so this is all of the examples that I have prepared for you. We focused mainly on the what, like what in this photo is not ideal? What is it? Like which feature? During an actual feedback process for a member, as well as focusing on the what, I also focus on the how and the why. So why this happened and how to fix it, how to move forward from here. As I mentioned earlier, if you've practiced for a while, you'll notice that you make similar mistakes kind of over and over again. So in those times, it's kind of like, well, you know that these are your mistakes, but somehow it just keeps on happening. And you're kind of wondering why, and you know that it's happening, but somehow even with that knowledge, it still keeps happening. So you want to cut the learning curve, and I can help you cut that learning curve and progress a lot faster. We have an online bench test course called the Bench Test Mastery. And through Bench Test Mastery, because we've worked together for a longer amount of time, it's kind of like you're having a longer term mentorship. Because that's, in my opinion, the shortcoming of a live course is the fact that you only work with that person for several days, and then afterwards you kind of lose touch, and then it's like you're on your own. So feedbacks. For our members, this is how feedbacks work. And I'll get to your questions after just a couple more slides of this. So if you have any questions, just keep plugging them into the chat room. I actually don't even have access to the chat room in my current view right now. But anyway, just saying. So how feedbacks work. You take photos of your work, and we have a guide for that. But through today's presentation, you've actually seen the critical views that are needed to get your work evaluated pretty well. So take photos of your work like that, and then you go to the feedback submissions area of the member site, and there it will ask you some questions like, oh, what tooth number is this? Do you have any questions? If you want to, you can self-evaluate, stuff like that, and you can attach your photos there as well. After you do that, we will pull up your pictures onto my computer, just like I did today, and I'll record a feedback video using my mouse as a pointer, talking about your preparation, focused on how to improve rather than just pointing out your mistakes, and then you'll get our email when it is ready for review. And if you want more information about that, there is actually a button below this video where you're watching this, so you can just click that and go over there. I believe there should also be a little, I don't know what you call it, but a little thing on the bottom right-hand side that asks you if you have a question. If you actually follow that link, you can schedule a time to ask many questions about bench test mastery that you want. Bench test mastery is a very comprehensive course that will guide you through your bench test. And quite frankly, nobody needs to go through every single module that we have. That's the beauty of it, is that you can just pick and choose what you need to focus on. For instance, if you are going to a school without wax carvings or case studies, you shouldn't be working on those things, or RPD, right? If you are going to a school that tells you exactly what it is that you'll be working on, then you should only be focusing on those things, etc. But these are some of the modules. I didn't want to list out all 32 modules, so these are just some of the modules that we do have inside Bench Test Mastery. Also, if you, and this is where you can get more information about it, or you can just go there straight by clicking on that yellow button. Also, if you happen to be going to Loma Linda, there is a big chance that you will be asked to read a radiograph. So if that is you and you're a little nervous, or you're just like, oh, how am I supposed to prepare for this radiograph thing? I don't want, like, do I have to look over everything? The answer is actually no, you shouldn't be, because you should really be focusing on your preparations. So we've created a course for that. It's called Dental Radiology and Radiographic Interpretation, and it's a new course that we put up. We've gotten really good feedbacks from people that have joined. So if you are interested in that, I will actually drop a link. We do not have a prepared page like we do for Bench Test Mastery with information about the radiology course. But if you want to, you can go over here and you'll see all of the courses that we have, and you can click into the dental radiology course and see what the modules are. Yeah, our feedback so far has been fantastically great, like overwhelmingly great, actually. I was very grateful because we worked really, really hard on it. Okay, now let me go into the chat and take a look at your questions. Sai, I think I'm losing my voice. Sorry. Sai is asking, do we need to do winged preparation? For most schools, no. The winged preparations are a very old school way of doing things, and currently there is one school that asks for winged. Even that school, they don't tell you to do a winged preparation. What it is they teach within their school to their students to do winged preparations. But if you actually look through their criteria and how they grade, a wing is not a part of it. But that school, their interview is over. That was Indiana. So if you're going to anywhere else, don't bother. I wouldn't do it. Yeah, because pretty much any other school teaches the gradual transition from a shoulder to chamfer. Okay, Manju asks, which burr can we use for chamfer margin other than chamfer margin burr? What do you mean? Why would you not want to use a chamfer margin burr for a chamfer margin? Use a chamfer margin burr. 856016, that's your classical burr, and that's what I would recommend that you use. Susie asks, when I do the interproximal reduction in order to avoid damage to the adjacent tooth, I end up making a heavy chamfer shoulder as the contact on Columbia teeth are broad and located more gingivally and cervically. On the other hand, Kilgore teeth are comparatively easy for proximal reduction as the contact is not too cervically and gingivally located. How do I avoid the mistake if I'm making on a Columbia tooth? Okay, great question. Let me bring up a photograph that I could perhaps use to explain this. Let's go to the occlusal view. I'm gonna have to go back into presentation mode. So give me a sec. As you know, every switch back and forth to me. Okay. In order to get a good interproximal reduction, this starts from actually buccal and lingual reductions. So you can't just like, you have to prime the preparation to be ready for a good interproximal reduction in order to get one. And actually, this is a great example. When you are working on your buccal, I'll just kind of demonstrate on this molar tooth right here. When you're working on your axial surfaces, most people choose to work on your buccal first, right? So when you work on your buccal, you want to go all the way interproximally, as close as you can, as farther in you can with your 856016 or 847 KR016, depending on whether you're making a shoulder or a chamfer. If it's a PFM, for a molar or premolars, it's always going to be a ceramic margin on the buccal, because you're not going to do a full gold crown, obviously, on a premolar because it's an aesthetic tooth. Anyway, whatever burr it is that you're using, you're going to go interproximally as far in as you can. Same from the palatal. You're going to go as in to as deep in as you can. And then you break the contact, okay? After you do that, like the area that you have to trespass and get rid of to break the contact reduces dramatically. So you'll see like wings, right? Like you'll see like this wing, but this wing should be really like right here and right here. And you're only getting rid of that. And see how it's not that far away. But if I stopped my buccal and lingual reduction here and here, I have to connect here all the way to here. And if I connect that in a straight line, my margin is that much wider interproximally. Does that make sense? And on the mesial side, we actually see evidence of this operator stopping the reduction, making this exact mistake that I just talked about. On this buccal surface, this operator seems to have only done it till from here to here. And starting here, it's more evident on the mesial side. Starting here, they tried to go in and make the interocclusal or the interproximal reduction. And the result is a very wide interproximal reduction, wider than it needs to be. And I mean, this could have been avoided, like the sharpness could have been smoothened out, but it's a very square appearance as well. So that is what you want to do. You want to go in as much as possible. And when you do that, because you're likely going to be doing a dry cut, this is not a watered cut. And when you're doing a dry cut, like it only takes a second for all of the dust to go everywhere and you not be certain like where you are. So a tip that I like to tell people is blow off the dust, place the burr right at the end of the wing, and then look, how much room do you have until your burr is actually going to hit the adjacent tooth. If you have a little bit more room, you can trust your hands and go a little bit farther, even though the moment you step on that pedal again, dust is going to blow off and it's going to cover the surface and you're not going to be sure anymore. You've seen it, right? So you've got to, like, of course, steady hand rest, and your hands do need to allow for it. And we have tips on how to improve your hand stability so you can do things like this. But if your hands are not stable, this whole thing is going to be difficult. But yeah, that's how you want to approach it. Okay, we have time for just a couple more questions. What burr is used for shoulder and chamfer margins? For shoulders, 847 KR016, and for chamfers, 856 016. Aditi asks, how to perform proximal cutting without nicking the adjacent tooth? I believe that should also answer that question, what I just explained with this, because the longer you go, the wider it becomes, and it's also easy to deviate away from path and touch the adjacent tooth and do all these things. Mistakes happen when you have a long ways to go interproximally rather than a short ways to go. If this, when working on this premolar, if the contact was broken appropriately, this operator only had to go from here to here. But instead, this operator ended up going from here to here. It's like twice as wide, right? And your odds for mistakes go up drastically. But other things you want to do to prevent nicking of the adjacent tooth is things like, before you actually like use a burr in the interproximal area, first just bring it in when it is not rotating and make sure that you can actually pass it through, or at least almost pass it through. If you can't, it's not time to use that burr yet. You need to go a size down. So it's still not time for, you need to stick with that shape, but just a size down so that you can clear the space for the wider burr that you're attempting to use. Things like this. And Aditi also asks how to avoid slipping of the burr. Now, from these two questions, how to do the proximal cutting without nicking the adjacent tooth and how to avoid slipping of the burr, I'm guessing, Aditi, that you need to actually work on your hand stability. Slipping of the burr is hand stability. You need a very solid finger rest when doing this, both the proximal areas and the lingual surfaces, whichever surface. When you're working, you need hand stability. We have a whole section on that inside Bench Test Mastery to guide you through it, but the biggest thing that I can tell you right now is have a solid, rock solid finger rest. Otherwise, our, how do I say it? Otherwise, our hand muscle, our arm muscles are so very strong that we're not used to working in like 0.3 millimeter, 0.5 millimeter increments when we do anything, right? Like it's less than a millimeter, like come on, it's really small, very, very precise. You have to let your finger rest or your hand rest, your rest, absorb all of this strong force coming through your arm muscles so that they don't get transferred into your handpiece. If they get transferred into your handpiece, that's when you end up doing things like slipping and things like that that you didn't intend to do, like deepening even though you didn't want to deepen, or widening even though you didn't want to widen. Things like this all happen because of those the command over your handpiece is not strong enough at this time. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, so that's how you want to go about it. You really want to focus on your hand skills. If you don't stabilize your hands first, this is the mistake that I made the first year. I did not stabilize my hands. I didn't even know about this concept. I had no idea. I would just be like, oh, I don't know, I keep nicking the adjacent tooth. That's too bad. I should try more teeth. But that was not the answer, because unless you're actually working to improve what's fundamentally causing this problem, you're not going to improve very much. And your height at which you can, how much you can improve with the unstable hands that you do have is not going to be high enough for you to actually pass the bench test. So this is actually a very critical piece of this entire thing, is your hand stability and your hand skills itself. And this is the last question. Do we need to angle the shoulder margin? Yes, you need to flare the shoulder margins. And I believe, actually, yeah, you're right. I did not show you an example of one that did not flare. But yes, from your buckle wall to your shoulder, it's not 90 degrees, it's about 110 degrees. So always flare it out. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for coming. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. This is a lot. I know, I'm aware that there are a lot of questions that I could not get to. There's a reason there is a whole class for this and a course for this. I could probably talk about this with you guys overnight. So thank you for coming. If you are a member, post your questions inside the forum and I'll get back to you there. If you're not a member and if you're interested in perhaps working with me on improving your hand skills because you have a bench test coming up, whatever the situation may be, or maybe you don't have a bench test coming up right now, but you feel like you should get started, which if you're wondering that, I highly, highly encourage you to do so because there's a lot of work to do. Again, there's a button below called Get Bench Test Mastery in yellow. If you just scroll underneath this, excuse me, you just scroll underneath this video. It's right there. You can click there, get more information. If you have any questions about it, mail in, or you can schedule a time to chat with me. And next week, Kevin will be having a workshop in something around interviewing. So clear out your calendars. I promise that will be amazing as well. And have a great rest of your night. And I will see you guys back in a couple of weeks. And oh, by the way, just in case you are a Bench Test Mastery member, we're starting up office hours starting tomorrow morning. Office hours means I will be online, ready to answer your questions. And it will not be a prepared presentation. Instead, I'll have myself and a pen and paper ready so that I can draw things and explain things through in depth with you. So if you have any questions unanswered from today, and if you're a member, please come to office hours tomorrow. Check your email for the time and the location. I've sent it to you. And have a great rest of your night. And I hope to see you next week with Kevin, of course, and then in the week afterwards with me again. And everybody that has a bench test, I wish you the absolute best of luck. And please treat it like gold. This opportunity that you have, don't just let it slip. All you'll do is regret it. Okay? All right. Bye.